Welcome to the Space for Grace podcast, a place where you can come as you are, hear genuine conversations about women's holistic health, and leave educated, inspired, and encouraged about your health and fitness journey. Get ready to find freedom to flourish in your physical, mental, and spiritual health. I'm your host, MK, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Space for Grace. All right, welcome back to the Space for Grace podcast. I am so excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking about gentle nutrition, negative body image, and how to overcome that. And so on the podcast today, we have Brittany Braswell. Brittany is a registered dietitian, food freedom, and body image coach, public speaker, and host of the Joy-Filled Eater podcast. She specializes in the treatment of disordered eating and negative body image, providing Christ-centered coaching to Christian women around the world who are ready to break free from the bondage of food guilt and body shame. Brittany and her husband, Chris, have been happily married for 11 years and live with their 3 precious children in the heart of Alabama. Brittany, welcome.
Hey, Madison. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Me too. I'm so excited. I was telling you earlier, I just love what you do. It is so needed. And I wish I had someone like you and the information that you share years ago in high school and college for me and my friends. So this is going to be such a good resource for all my listeners. But before we jump into the topic, I have a fun little icebreaker question for you. Are you ready?
Love it. Yes, bring it on.
What is one of your unpopular opinions?
Oh, okay. I have a lot, but I'm going to narrow it down to one since we're talking kind of about this today. There's a lot of conversation in the eating disorder, body image, food freedom space about body positivity. And my unpopular opinion is that body positivity is not biblical, and it's also not necessary in order to improve body image. So I'm happy to kind of explain that a little bit because people are like, what do you mean? Like, don't ignore body positivity. But body positivity is oftentimes when people use the phrase, we're talking about just talk about how much you like your body, or if there's a part of your body that you're not happy with, just look in the mirror and say something nice about it. But when we get focused on body positivity, it really becomes very inward focused, very self-focused. And it's really, really easy for that to become a trigger for comparison. Because if you're trying to talk up okay, well, I really like, my eyes or my arms or my stomach or whatever it is, it makes you pay that much more attention to your body. And so rather than focusing on body positivity, we really want to focus on shifting. We really want to practice, I guess, shifting your focus away from your body and learning to cultivate body trust. And so that's a whole nother conversation that we could go into another time. Maybe I'll have you on the Joyful Eater podcast, and we could chat some more about that too. But yeah, that's my unpopular opinion: is body positivity is not necessary or even biblical to improve your body image.
I love that. That's so helpful because body positivity is continuing to focus on your body. And it's so important to just be able to get our minds off of that and onto other things that are more important and find freedom to live our lives and have joy. Yes, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I want to ask you why you're passionate about this topic of food freedom, body image. What kind of got you into this?
Yeah, so the Reader's Digest version of it, I guess, is I started off really with an interest in sports nutrition. I became interested a lot more in nutrition when I was in college. And throughout my time undergraduate and especially in grad school studying, I just kept seeing the prevalence of eating disorders and disordered eating and body image struggles and dieting, especially in athletes. But then more so than that, I was like, wow, it's just super prevalent. And I kept realizing, well, the education I'm getting is great. However, a lot of the language that's used to provide the information is really biased. And it's really shame-filled language a lot of times. The saying you should eat this, or there's a lot of good food, bad food kind of language that we could go into more today. But But I really found in my own journey with education and with learning, like the people I'm working with, when I approach things with like eat this, don't eat that, it's just making like they're getting more food rules, they're feeling
Mhm.
more defeated. And so I just kind of sought the Lord and I was like, I need you to show me a better way. And through again, kind of short version, through a struggle with infertility, the Lord really challenged me to learn how to surrender, how to let go of
Mm.
control. And control is such a huge issue for so many women struggling with body image and with
Mhm.
food related rules and struggles. And so um, I just got really passionate about helping women learn how to overcome their fears, let go of that control, and really surrender the process to the Lord, invite the Lord into the food freedom process so that it can really become something that is life giving. And for the phrase I use a lot, joy filled,
Mhm.
rather than something that's fear based. We don't want to be constantly fearing what we're eating. Or, like you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
Madison, like thinking about food or your body all the time. We want to be able to move away from that. So I get really passionate. One of the verses that I share with my clients and students so often is from Galatians 5:1 that says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again." And I love that the Lord puts
Mhm.
that in because He's like, "You're going to try to pick it back up. You're going to try to let it
Yes.
go and then pick it back up. So don't let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." So I'm just really passionate about seeing women set free from that and knowing that like
Mhm.
God, when you bring the Lord into the process, that freedom, and lasting freedom especially is possible.
That is amazing. I love how you started observing a struggle that everyone was going through around you, and then the Lord used that to lead you to help bring people into freedom. One thing you mentioned was the negative language that you
Mhm.
started noticing that was kind of triggering a lot of
Yeah.
these eating disorders or just anxiety around food. Can you dig into kind of what that language or those trigger words were so that we can be aware of that?
Yeah, yeah. So the biggest the biggest ones that I see that end up leading to a lot of guilt and a lot of shame-based thoughts around what we eat or feeling this obligation to eat a certain way is a lot of like this is good, this is bad with food, or this is clean and this is junk, or this is even healthy and this is unhealthy. Um, it's not that those words are inherently like bad in and of themselves, but when we apply them to food, we inadvertently end up applying them to ourselves. So, for example, if I say, well, pizza is bad, you should never eat pizza. I should never eat pizza. Then if I do, I'm going to think, I'm just going to kind of inadvertently go, okay, well, now I did something wrong, or I should feel guilty about that because I declared this a bad food or unhealthy or junk or whatever term you want to use.
Mhm.
And so I'll just give a super quick tip strategy here, super practical. If that is something as you're listening that you find you struggle with labeling foods as, good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, whatever it might be, when you notice that thought or when you notice even talking it out loud or hearing someone else say it, to pause and instead of like just drop that language and instead of saying, oh, is this good or bad, say, how can this food benefit me right now? Or what purpose is
Mhm.
this food serving for me? Because then you can decide at that point, like you can see it in more what I like to just consider like neutral terms. We want to go for
Yeah.
food neutrality. We don't want it to give us this big emotional response because when we're emotionally tied to a food, we typically feel controlled by it. So,
Mhm.
so like if someone says, I'm in Alabama, we have a lot. Bluebell is like our big ice cream brand that we have around here. Madison, where are you? I don't even remember. Where do you live?
I'm in Franklin, Tennessee.
That's right. That's right. You're not far. So you're familiar with
Not
Bluebell.
far. Yes.
So I had somebody tell me the other day, like, can't keep Bluebell in the house because I'll just eat the whole thing.
Mm.
Um, and as soon as somebody tells me something like that, I'm like, that's because it's got some level of control over you right now because it gives you
Mhm.
that emotional response. Like, if it's there, I feel this obligation to eat it. And so when we work towards food neutrality and we don't see foods as good or bad, um, and we expose ourselves to them, right? Like if you have bluebell, if it's a trigger food for you on a regular basis, and you kind of desensitize yourself to it,
Mhm.
it's no longer has that shiny factor. It's not on that pedestal of like, oh, I can only have this on special occasions or those kind of things. So that's a little bit of an explanation, but yeah, when it comes to that sort of moralizing language around food, that's one way to
Hmm.
start challenging that.
That's so good. And it's really helpful to have the language because I've kind of walked myself through that to be able to get to the place of food neutrality and, have self-control. I can have a cookie. I don't have to eat the whole sleeve or whatever it is. But it's really good to have language behind that. And then if we start to slip back into those trigger words, being able to recognize that and
Yeah.
take a step back. Um, so you mentioned the control aspect, that a lot of times it's tied to needing to control things when it comes to food rules and restrictions. Can you explain that a little bit and how we can actually have control over what we choose to eat and not eat rather than the food controlling us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So oftentimes when someone has a really strained, anxiety-ridden kind of relationship with food, it's oftentimes tied to body image or feeling like, hey, I need to control my food so that I can control my body. Um, and if there was a magic wand, a magic pill, a magic food, a magic diet plan, whatever, that would allow you to say, okay, I'm going to eat this much and I'm going to shape my body this specific way. Like somebody would be a billionaire by now. But the
Mm-hmm.
fact of the matter is, the more we try to control our intake, the more we end up with like a restrict binge cycle where, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make this food off limits because it's quote unquote bad or it's junk. Um, and instead, I'm going to focus on people can swing kind of to the other side to more orthorexia type tendencies where it's like have to eat only these quote unquote healthy foods or
Mm-hmm.
clean eating or need to follow a specific diet only for the sake of not for medical reasons. There's that's a whole nuance to it, but
Mm-hmm.
fits this is off the table because I'm afraid of how it's going to impact my body. That's where a lot of again those kind of emotional ties come in. And when we try so hard to control something that's really not totally controllable, like our body size, shape, weight, composition, we do end up having a lot of fear-based thoughts. And so,
Mm-hmm.
a more helpful way to approach it if someone is struggling with fear, or if someone feels like, hey, I have to control a body specific way or in a specific way. Um, One thing that can be really helpful to ask is like, okay, by exercising this control, what need am I really meeting? Or is control, there's nothing wrong with having control in areas of our life. We don't want to feel totally out of control all the time, but being able to say, okay, is this an area where I actually do need control? Or is this an area where I need to release some of that control to the Lord? And that's
Mm-hmm.
goes way beyond just food in our body. And so um, I get questions like this all the time. So I'm happy to share this with you if you want it, Madison. But I created a resource just called the Needs Assessment because I see so often women going, I don't really even know, why I restrict this way or why I use, binging or whatever the behavior is, excessive exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Movement is wonderful, but it can also come disordered as well. So when we can recognize what is that need that behavior is meeting, um,
Mm-hmm.
we can still get that need met. And we can ask the Lord to help meet that need for us, but it can be done in a life giving way, not in one that might lead to fear or deprivation, scarcity mentality around food. And so, again, it's not that control in and of itself is a dangerous thing, but when we
Mm-hmm.
feel like we have to be in control of our body, it's not really totally controllable. That often ends up turning into, okay, now I have all this fear around I have to control my food intake in a certain way. And for most people, that's a contributing factor to a very disordered or unhealthy relationship with food. So the good news is with
Mm-hmm.
that, there are things that we can do. I work with my students and clients on this on a weekly basis on
Right.
how do we work on letting go of some of that control. And then what are the areas too where we can see like what are some areas where control is not disordered? It's just helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a longer conversation, but that is absolutely the gist of it, is that you don't, if you're stuck in that fear right now, or I feel like I have to control my food to control my body, or I have to control my exercise to control my body, um, then that is probably, there's probably a negative core belief or limiting belief in there that needs to be challenged.
Right. Digging into the emotion and the beliefs behind those
Yeah. Yeah.
behaviors. That's so good. If someone is wanting to get rid of their food rules, find more just balance and freedom from restriction, what are some practical tips for getting over that like fear of if I let go of control, I'm just gonna go crazy, eat whatever, and like gain weight, become unhealthy? I feel like that might be a common fear for people when they're starting out this journey of letting go of some of the control and restriction. What tips do you have for that?
So one super practical exercise or challenge that I would say, and I give this to clients a lot, is called the circle of control. And if you're not familiar with this, think about it as like two concentric circles. So you have like a smaller circle in the middle and then a slightly larger circle like that. Um, the circle in the middle being your circle of control. And what you would do is you could just draw this out on paper if you want to. In the middle, that smaller circle, you write, what are all of the things that are currently in my control that I can absolutely have control over, or that I feel like I need control over?
Mm,
Um, and then in the outer circle of that, this is what we would consider the circle of concern. And these are things that you're like, these feel totally out of my control. Like maybe I have some say so in it, but I don't really like these things make me nervous because I don't feel like I control them. And some of them may be totally like there's no aspect of control really for the final result. So, like an example, I'll give a non-food example of that. Might be something like the weather, right? I cannot control the weather. I can't control um, like what songs I'm going to hear on the radio in the car. I can change the radio station, right? I can
mhm,
adapt to it, but I can't control it. And so, when you can first do those things and apply your individual fears around control to each of those areas, then you can look at that circle of concern and say, kind of like with the example of the radio, like, how can I adapt to these so they don't feel so scary, right? If I feel like I can't actually control my weight, or I can't actually control, if I feel like my weight dictates my health, right? And that's something I feel like I have to control my weight in order to control my health. To be able to
mm,
say, okay, well, how can I adapt to this? If my fear is around my health and I'm concerned about heart health, what are some things that I can actively do that are health promoting rather than just
mhm,
focused on weight loss or restriction or whatever? So that might be, well, I can choose to adapt by engaging in movement that I know is, helpful for my cardiovascular system, or can
mhm,
intentionally add some things to my diet that are healthy, some heart healthy fats and some fibers and some color. So it becomes an exercise that you can use to try to help let go of some fear by saying, hey, even though I can't control the outcome, I can adapt to it. And when you look at that circle of control in the very middle, going, kind of again asking yourself that question, even if I can control all of these things, are some of these things areas that I need to let go and
mhm.
surrender? Maybe surrender to the Lord, maybe to delegate and give to somebody else, maybe just to let go of. And so that can be helpful exercise to personalize to you and to your
Mhm.
own specific control related fears.
I like that a lot because then you are kind of separating your health from your weight, and you're able to say, okay, actually, I want my end goal not to be weight loss or weight gain, but to improve my cardiovascular endurance, or I want to get stronger or more flexible, whatever it is. And then you exercise and fuel your body from that place of trying to pursue that goal rather than just weight loss or weight gain. I feel like sometimes I see people who are, they've realized that they have an unhealthy relationship with food, and so they know they need to gain weight, and then it's all about how can I gain weight? And just eating everything in sight to reach this weight goal, but then it's still all about weight and how their
A
body
number.
looks, and you're still in
Yeah.
that unhealthy mindset. So everything you
Yes.
said is incredible. Um, how are
That's
some ways? Go ahead.
That's where is it okay, Matt? If I'm going to add in one other, and you've kind of already said this, I'm just going to put my language to it as well. Is
Hmm.
maybe this is another unpopular opinion. Nobody actually just wants weight loss, which people are
Hmm.
probably listening and going, "Yes, I do," or "I need to reach a number." But asking yourself again that question, like, what do I believe is possible in, a different body size or with a different body composition or whatever that's not possible right now. And
Hmm.
because weight loss or weight change is a means to an end for everyone. Just like you said, like there's a deeper goal behind it. The
Hmm.
most of the time someone tells me I want to lose weight or I want to change my body. The number one reason I get when we dig into it is I want to feel more confident. I feel really like insecure in my body and I really want to feel more confident. Okay,
Hmm.
well, weight loss isn't going to guarantee that. I've
Right.
worked with women who had a specific goal number in mind that was way below what it should have been. And they even got to that point at some point before worked with me and said it just wasn't enough.
Hmm.
Body image isn't better, it's worse. I compare more, I'm more obsessed. So being able just to say, what is that actual outcome that I'm searching for? And how can I work towards that in a healthy way that doesn't screw up that relationship with food or your body in the process?
Definitely. That's so good. It's good to remember that it's an idol to worship our
Yeah.
bodies and want to be the skinniest version or whatever, because idols don't ever satisfy. They just take and take and take. And so that goes with any idol, but
Yeah.
even weight loss or obsession with our body image. I read
Yeah.
a great book called Compared to Who. I think it's by Heather Creekmore
Heather
years
Creekmore.
ago.
It's sitting over here on my desk.
It's such a good book. And that's the main takeaway I got from it and remember from it is that that is an idol. And I remember reading that in high school and I was just shocked because I had never heard that before or thought of, me comparing my body to someone else as a sin. So that was very
Yeah.
eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
And
She and I have had a couple of conversations about that because she talks so much. She's compared to who in her second book, The Burden of Better is also
mm,
fantastic. And so that's another great like podcast recommendation for anyone who really struggles with comparison. She's got the Compared to Who podcast and it's awesome.
yes,
But yeah, it's really easy for body image even on its own to become an idol.
right. And so how do you help people get to that root need, like helping them think through, you don't just want to lose weight, there's a deeper thing going on below the surface.
That's where a lot of the um, working with a coach who's not afraid to
Mm,
ask you the uncomfortable questions can be really helpful because so often it's really helpful for us to get support from
hmm.
friends. But there's a big difference in support and accountability. And a lot of times we try to make the same person responsible for both, and that's not always healthy or helpful. Sometimes the people that are closest to us that love us are afraid, like, don't know how to hold them accountable without feeling like I'm nagging them or without feeling that I'm the food police or that I'm
Yeah.
constantly telling them, one thing or another about how they eat or their body. And I don't want to make it worse. And so having a coach, like people want to work with you, Madison, or if somebody works with me or anybody else, to have someone in your corner who can recognize the difference in your voice and your thoughts versus the disordered voice or the lies of the enemy coming in and being able
Mm,
to call that out and then call them up and say, hey, this isn't you. I'm gonna ask you the hard questions. It's gonna feel uncomfortable to talk about. Let's do it. Let's create a safe environment to have those conversations. And the short answer for this is you have to just ask that uncomfortable why. You just like
mhm.
pretend you're back in your like 2 or 3 year old, self. Or if you have little ones, I'm in a stage of life where I have a newborn, a 4 year old, and a 6 year old. So we're kind of out of the toddler phase. And I still constantly hear, well, why, mommy? Why? And when we can ask ourselves that why question, even 5, 6, 7 times when it comes to why do I feel like I need to lose weight? Well, because then, these I can fit into this size clothing. Well, why does that matter to me? Well, because and do that 5, 6, 7 times. Usually by the time you get to 6 or 7, you've gotten to the core of it. And then we can really start working from there. That's where a lot of the emotions and the hard stuff comes up. So it's just
Yeah.
easier and it feels safer to focus on, well, weight loss, let me get a specific number or let me get to this particular pant size and then I'll be good. So just ask that why question a bunch of times and get
Yeah.
some support and accountability as you do it.
Dig deeper and deeper.
Yes.
So say someone has a professional, a coach that they're working with through their eating disorder or body image, whatever the struggle is. Um, what can their friends do to support them well? What are some tips for someone who has a friend who's really struggling and is kind of at a loss for how to be a good friend while they're struggling?
That's such a good question. And I hear this all the time from friends and family members saying, "Oh, hey, my daughter or my cousin or my roommate or whomever, like has a really hard relationship with food." Number one, I would say just make yourself available to them. Don't have the pressure of like, "Hey, you have to tell me everything," but let them know you're available if they do want to ask for that support or the accountability. Sometimes they just need to be seen. They need to know that like somebody realizes that I'm hurting and struggling, and don't worry about always feeling like you have to say the right thing, just being there, and making sure that they know they're not alone in the process, that you don't have to understand what they feel to be able to be encouraging and supportive. Um, Number two, I'd say practice using that neutral language that we talked about, making sure that you're not talking about your own body or food in a really moralizing way. Um,
Mhm.
in the same realm, like just avoiding body talk sometimes can be helpful, even just for a season on so often people want to say, "Oh, well, you look great," or "You look whatever," and physical comments, even compliments, intended compliments, can be heard and received in a totally different way. I've had
Mm,
clients that will say when I worked at an eating disorder treatment center, they would say, "Hey, my parents came to visit this weekend, and they said I looked really healthy," and what I heard from that was, "You've gained weight."
mm,
And so just not making body-related comments or compliments, just kind of avoiding that can be really helpful. And then
mhm,
fourth, I would say just to wrap this up is getting educated yourself. Even if you don't struggle, I guarantee you, if I went out on the street and polled like 100 people, 90 to 95 plus would have some, whether it's consistent or sporadic, disordered food, body, or behaviors. Just because
mhm,
it's the society we live in. And it doesn't mean everybody has a disordered relationship with food. We all have those moments even in the day, like when you it may not be a constant struggle, but when you have the awareness around what does it look like? Does it sound like? How do I recognize it? That can be really helpful. And there's all kinds of incredible resources to get some of that education. So that would be one of the biggest things, just to have that so you're more aware of when it is happening. And so you know when to
mhm.
step in and help.
That's so good. Those are very practical tips, and it takes kind of the pressure off. Like, just be there, be a supportive friend. Don't feel like you have to have the answers or fix anything. Same with someone who's grieving and you don't know what to do. Like, sit with them, be there, make them feel seen, and like they can talk to you about whatever they're going through. And yeah, that is huge. I love my friends that do that for me and just kind of, I know they're there for me.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing those tips. If someone wants to find you, contact you, find your resources, what's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, I show up on the Joyful Eater podcast every Tuesday, so you can find that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And then if you want to connect with me on my website, that's a really great place to go in order to make sure that you stay abreast with what's happening on the podcast. And I love to send out just free gifts and resources to my VIP insiders. So you can, if you want to get on that list, you can head to brittanybraswellrd.com/VIP. And if you do that, and you send me an email and say, "Oh, I heard you on Space for Grace." I would love to just send you a coupon for like one any of the body image resources. If there's something we've talked about today, and you're like, "Hey, I heard you talk about this. I'm interested in it." I would love to support you in taking that first step because I know that's the first step is always the hardest. So those are the two best places: the podcast and the email list. That way you can stay connected with any questions you might need when it comes to food freedom and body image.
Amazing. Thank you, Brittany. I'll put those links in the description for everyone. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Madison. It was an absolute pleasure being here today.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Space for Grace podcast. Be sure to check out the description for any links or resources that were mentioned during this episode. And if you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, share with a friend, and leave a review. I hope you're leaving today educated, inspired, and ready to flourish. This is Space for Grace.